let's just say mobility. I'm going to do mobility every single day. It's probably not going to happen every day. If you were to say, hey, I'm going to do it every single day and I get 2 oops days a week or 2 off days a week, I can use at any point. Now you're building those positive reps week after week after week because it's more sustainable. And so now just because you miss one, instead of feeling bad about it and quitting or not coming back to it, or now you're like, oh, I failed at it, and now you're way less likely to continue. You already built that into the, mental agreement contract you did with yourself.
Yeah.
So you're actually still on target. And so I would say making behaviors and that mental way of framing it to make it sustainable yet consistent is way more powerful than just trying to commit to something that you're not going to be able to commit to. Welcome to ART,
the Adventure Race Training Podcast.
I'm Nick Herf.
And I'm Jason Magnus.
And with years of coaching experience and formal education in human performance, we've helped numerous athletes to achieve their goals and increase their self-efficacy. My background comes from formal graduate level education, coaching a variety of collegiate teams and professional endurance athletes. My athletes range from everyday racers to NCAA All-Americans and multiple world record holders.
And I'm the captain of Team Bend Racing. I've devoted the past 2.5 decades of my life to adventure racing, competing at the top level for over a decade. But I draw a lot of my coaching and training philosophy on my years as a top-level climbing, acrobatics, and highlining coach, essentially trying to minimize the learning curve on notoriously difficult sports. I've also coached a few world champions, so together, Nick and I have some great successes.
Ultimately, we're here to share our knowledge and expertise with the community to help you prepare for your next big race. Our goal is that these conversations provide valuable insights to elevate your adventure.
All right, let's get started.
All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. Right now we have Jason, Chelsea, and I down here, and Jason's going to kick it off with some hot or nots.
We survived Christmas, Nick. How was your Christmas?
It was good. Yeah, really good. Some downtime to kind of unwind a little bit and actually get a lot of training in, which is good, and, just see the family.
It's always nice when you can actually, eat a bunch of Christmas cookies and get your training in. So it's like, I like it because I just think of it as extra carbs, and it makes me train extra hard because we had a lot of Christmas cookies.
I also had a lot of cookies, which was great. And then my runs actually, especially doing some interval work, I had a lot of extra pep. So I think I probably need to up my carbs in general, which would be a good thing.
It's almost New Year's, right? And I'm sure you do New Year's resolutions at some point. And I've been thinking about kind of like adventure race specific or appropriate New Year's resolutions. So I compiled 10 hot or nots here. And I just want you to think, just give our listeners an idea of like what they might want to start the new year with, or what would be a really bad idea. And we can agree to disagree. So I've got Chelsea in here, so she's going to answer some of these too. So I'm just going to jump into it. Sound good?
Yeah, let's do it.
So would it be a good idea to have a New Year's resolution to say January is your no GPS navigation month? So commit to like a whole month in January of never using your phone GPS. So you're driving your car, you're going back old school navigation in everything you do. What do you think?
I think that you limit the scope so that way it's not all or nothing. And then that way you can actually stick with it with just constraints on daily life. So like you're driving 2 hours away somewhere you don't know, and it's going to take a lot of planning and prep to print out maps or, I don't know, write down directions or whatever you need to do to make that work.
So you're going not. What do you think, Chelsea?
I think it's hot. I like that.
I think it's hot. Mostly because I'm older than you, Nick, and I remember when we didn't have GPSs. So I
remember MapQuest and all that. Don't worry.
No, this is before MapQuest. I'm thinking like old school paper atlas. Driving, like when I go to a store downtown, I might never get there because I've forgotten how to like look at a map and do that. But
I mean, yeah, you're horrible in this town.
Yeah, I'm bad at navigating in town. Okay, so we're going. Chelsea and I are going hot. You're going in between. So number 2, practicing, making a resolution to practice what I call the cognitive shuffle. And the cognitive shuffle is like practicing using mental games to fall asleep faster. You can do these mental things in your head and hopefully fall asleep in TA or when you're taking a nap. What do you think?
Yeah, totally hot.
Totally hot, yeah. And it takes some training. I've done some research on it, and I'm horrible at it because I don't do that at home. But I'm going to try this year, make that commitment, have whatever it is. Dan is really good at this, and he can just fall asleep racing. So yeah, cognitive shuffle, hot. All right, we all agree. Okay, number 3, taking some time in the new year to do some FKT hunting. Looking around, get on that website, figure out local things that nobody's done that you can have your personal FKT goals at to see what that world is like.
Yeah, hot. I love that.
Hot. Yeah, you've coached some FKT athletes, and it's kind of nice to be able to do those hard races when you're not actually racing. Chelsea?
Yeah, that's hot.
Okay, another one, committing to an extra hour of sleep. So just really thinking about getting extra hours of sleep, especially as your training volume hopefully increases because you're listening to this awesome podcast. So as your first recovery option, committing to more sleep.
Hot.
Hot.
Same, that's hot. I feel like most athletes don't sleep enough just because of daily life.
Yeah, number 1 recovery is sleep.
Yep. Okay, this other one comes from the ultra world, but people are committing to like solo training only. So this idea that you get more grit and all that stuff by only training solo.
No, there's enough. I do enough training on my own that when I can train with somebody else or have somebody tag along, it's just a nice mental reprieve. So there's enough of that mental grind, I think, already that everybody has to do just because endurance training is very time consuming. So to have somebody consistently on the same schedule as you is impossible, I feel. If I can get out with people, it's just so much better. Time flies.
I think that's, it's really easy to have those zone 1, zone 2 things when you're in a group and just commit to like, hey, let's go make sure nobody's pushing too hard if we're trying to do that. And then I think there's also a huge benefit to occasionally going out with some people and working that teamwork so that you're all pushing hard, right? And when somebody's falling apart, you carry packs. You just get used to that kind of cross-loading of weight and effort to keep everybody in these higher intensities, at least for short periods. So yeah, I'd say solo only training is a not. Okay, committing to learning a new skill in 2026, like really investing in pack rafting or maybe getting into caving or rope works or bike mechanics. But as an adventure racer, like look at yourself and commit to doing that non-sexy skill that you've been avoiding. I'd say hot.
Just a tip for that one is you can sign up for a clinic. And so you take 30 minutes to sit down, research clinics, and then you pay for it and sign up and you're going to be able to go. You know what I mean? And so you can take 30 minutes and then hit that mark pretty easy by committing to it.
That you can also sign up for my Sleep More clinic where I will call you every night. It's very expensive, but I'll make you sleep longer. That's not a thing, but that'd be pretty cool.
That sounds creepy.
Bless you. Okay. Next one is trying to work towards 2026 being a less waste or zero waste race season. I know that's hard to do, but I've been thinking a lot about that with our planning of the Magnificent. And endurance racing is a lot about reusable or non-reusable time use packets. But I see people talking about making commitments to do less of that. I think that's hot.
Very hot.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that Jesse Tubb and I have been talking about in detail. So it's a high value of his is sustainability. So we've been having discussions and examining what that looks like. And it's kind of hard sometimes too, because even like, you're going to do pizzas after the race. Well, you're going to have plates, right? So what kind of plates are you going to get? And so, even as simple as, okay, let's do paper ones because we can recycle them versus styrofoam, easy decisions. But overall, I mean, it's difficult with everything that goes into races and all the support and all the little things and printing on paper, all that stuff can kind of really add up,
Yeah. Okay. So last one for now is, this is kind of like the no GPS, but this is the data. And this will go right into our podcast today, like ditching the data for 1 month, maybe not January, but should we be thinking as a resolution to take 1 month and ditch our data metrics and just see what it's like to train back in the old days? Thinking. When there's silence, I know that you guys are thinking.
I would say 1 month is a lot, right? I think doing a naked run once in a while, by naked I mean no GPS watch or anything, and you're just running off a feel. I think doing that every now and then is super good. To do a whole month of that
is okay.
I don't know. That's a lot.
I think it's really hard for me to put the watch down, but I would say right after an expedition race for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I think that's fine. I think that the timing of it would have to make sense.
Yeah.
Like when you need some decompression, or like around this time right now, where you just like are needing to just like ditch everything.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Yeah, I
I'm gonna
agree.
say I'm gonna say it's hot. I've done that a couple times. I really like myself. I mean, I like the metrics too. I obviously love the metrics, but have had times when I pay attention where I kind of get too into the watch and doing what it says. And if I can find the right time in my season when it's less crucial and more just kind of base miles or more maintenance, that putting the watch down and just really doing stuff for fun is super valuable, especially since if you're doing this sport for a long time. And you just said something that we'll come back to in another podcast. You said naked running, but I think about that as different because like naked running is good, and we won't get into that, like really naked running, like running naked. And Darren and I, who's on my podcast a lot, we actually found out that there's something called like Naked Mountain Bike Day. Have you heard about this, Nick?
I'm envisioning chafing.
I was envisioning the same thing. And Darren and I went to this like national naked mountain biking day and rode this 12-mile, pretty gnarly single track loop and had a blast. I'll put the link to it in this podcast, not the photos, but there's an article that I wrote for Gear Junkie because I didn't believe that this thing existed either. But yes, there is a naked mountain biking day, and Darren and I have bonded doing this together. So that's my last hot or not, like naked training. I'm going to go hot, at least just because, I mean, naked, hot training, like whatever. I'm going to say do some naked training in 2026. We might have just made this podcast a little bit less approachable to people, but I'm saying hot. Last one, Chelsea.
Naked training?
Yeah. I mean, not fully, not all the time.
I mean, yeah, for like a daily run, like mile run, yeah.
Okay, Nick.
I have no idea where I would get naked at to go run, so I'm going to go not to change it up.
You're East Coast. That's the harder thing.
Yeah, we get arrested out here for that.
Yeah, we just disappear into the woods, like literally right behind our house, and like nobody ever finds us except for the deer. So I think it depends on where you live. Okay.
Not in Philly, though. I'm not going to run around Philly naked.
Yeah, that's probably good. Yeah, don't do that. People, listeners, don't be smart about that, and do not point it back to this podcast saying, "Hey, yeah, the AR coach guys said you should run around naked." Okay, so
I got one now.
Yeah. Ooh, okay. I like it.
Have you raced naked in a race?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Way too often.
Yeah. Yep.
Mostly we keep underwear on, but we do a lot of underwear racing, and they're chafing. Dan does naked more than the rest of us on the team. But yeah, man, chafing. And there's nothing when you're in a hot race. So what about you? You've raced naked, I'm assuming?
Yeah, like in Ecuador, I was naked a bit. Yeah, I had some serious chafing going on at one point. Yeah.
So, and if you do that once in a while training, then you're more comfortable. We definitely have teammates that would be way more comfortable occasionally, like stripping down to their underwear, being naked, just to like let things breathe a little bit. But it's a tough thing if you're not trained. Okay, so that was a hot or not. We'll talk in another podcast if you made resolutions. So start to think about that. If there's anything you're going to do, but don't spoil it right now. I don't want to know.
Do we want to talk about tips for resolution, or we want to do another recording for that?
Yeah, what's your tips for resolutions?
So I think it's a couple things. It's either like a small thing you can knock out. So, for example, signing up for a clinic, you can commit in 30 minutes, you can research it, pay for it, and then you made that commitment, and now you're going to go achieve it. If it's process-oriented stuff like behavior change, there's a couple things. So, one is if you pair the behavior with an existing behavior, it's going to be reinforced and you're going to build it quicker. And so, for example, like I get up and do mobility in the morning, but I start the coffee maker. Then when I do the mobility, I knock it out. And then when I'm done, I pour the water into the French press and it's like good to go, right? And so then I immediately reward myself after doing it as well. And so now you're pairing the behavior with something you already do. And so every time you do that, you do the other. And it's a lot easier than just creating something out of nowhere. And then another one is an extrinsic reward can help you with intrinsic behaviors. So let's say you're just trying to train every day, if you reward yourself after, maybe with, I'm going to go with coffee, but maybe there's some kind of frou-frou fancy whipped cream thing you want to put in your coffee that's like a treat. Well, if you do that every time when you're done your training, now it kind of rewards your body in like the psychological aspect. And so now you're way more likely to build that behavior stronger and faster. So just kind of two little things I think you can do. And then a third one, there's actually a neat study. My ex was a behavioral psychologist, so we used to nerd out on stuff. Another one she would be big on was that, let's say you make a commitment, instead of making a commitment of every single day, I'm going to do X, right? Let's just say mobility. I'm going to do mobility every single day. It's probably not going to happen every day. If you were to say, hey, I'm going to do it every single day and I get 2 oops days a week or 2 off days a week, I can use it at any point. Now you're building those positive reps week after week after week because it's more sustainable. And so now just because you miss one, instead of feeling bad about it and quitting or not coming back to it, or now you're like, oh, I failed at it, and now you're way less likely to continue, you already built that into the mental agreement contract you did with yourself. So you're actually still on target. And so I would say making behaviors and that mental way of framing it to make it sustainable yet consistent is way more powerful than just trying to commit to something that you're not going to be able to commit to.
Right. The consistency has to be there. And one of the tools that I like, because I struggle with this a lot, is when I do something similar to what you said, like I'm going to do this thing every day. What I'll often do is say, I'm going to do one of these 3 things every day. Right. So I have the choice, like if it's yoga, mobility, or like whatever, core strength, right? So I have this thing that it does not always have to be, but I know they're all going to move the needle in the right direction. And I know that my tendency is like, I like to do mobility in the morning too, but if whatever, I wake up and have my coffee first and do that, then I have this path for, okay, now it's later. I missed that, right? I'm going to do this, so I have this, like, I need to do one of these 3 things every day, but I like the oops day too. So then you have this really low bar for success, right? And, we'll have to do another, like every time we do a podcast, we come up with more deep dives. But I think what we really enjoy discussing and sharing with people is how the mentality works, because like there's all this study on how to be successful and how to define success in a way that you repeatedly succeed, because as we repeatedly succeed for whatever that metric is, then our brain starts to look for that. And as we repeatedly fail, this is why when I coach people, I say, no matter what happens in your first 3 adventure races, do not drop out, right? Like, don't be thinking we're going to do good. You build these patterns where it's easier to drop out when you hit obstacles because that's your pattern, right? But if your pattern is to just continue going, right, or to find a way through, even if you don't have the placement you wanted or whatever, then that's the pattern that you create. So it's like we used to have the rules of 3 in acrobatics, where if we failed 3 times trying to learn a skill, we were not allowed to make the same mistake the 4th time or have the same failure mode the 4th time, because your brain starts to write those patterns, right? And so this is the same thing with resolutions, man. It's, if you can get a couple weeks out of the way and build that pattern, then you're going to hold it a lot longer.
2 things you said that were great. One was choice. People love choice. Kids love choice, right? So you tell the kids, hey, we need to do A and B. Which one do you want to do first? They're going to be way more excited to do it than, forcing them to do something, right? Which is huge. And then the other part is celebrate the wins, right? If you are trying to build that pattern of like training regularly, every time you step out and you start training, just like celebrate yourself. Like, yeah, like I'm pumped. Like I'm actually out here and I'm doing it. You know what I mean? And maybe last year I wouldn't be out here right now. So I'm getting better. And so then you're just super psyched and pumped in that moment. So like if you, instead of comparing yourself to, I know some people are doing, 8 to 10 miles is their normal run. I'm only doing 4 or whatever. It's like, no, like I'm out here. I'm actually doing the thing. I'm out here. I'm knocking out 40 minutes or an hour or whatever it is of running. Like I'm crushing it. And if you're talking nicely to yourself, but also uplifting in you actually doing it, it's going to carry a lot of weight emotionally on building that habit, as opposed to, I didn't quite get everything I wanted or this or that. Look at it in the positive light and the negative, and it's going to reinforce that.
I love this. This is why I love our podcast meetings. But I want to get us into the topic this week, right? So while everybody thinks about their resolutions, the paddling podcast was released a little while ago, and it was super well received. It was really great. Huge thanks again to Dan for coming on and really, breaking those things down. I had a lot of personal great feedback from that. People really enjoying that. and committing as part of their New Year's resolution to really think more about paddling and paddle training. And I did get a couple questions, and the one that I just want to talk about is somebody wrote me and asked about paddle, not so much paddle technique, but high angle versus low angle. And we didn't get really into this in the thing. And there's different types of kayaking paddle technique. We'll mostly talk kayaking. And so I just wanted to let this person know that their comments were pretty correct, that we want to train both. Angle and high angle is more when you're taking that arm as it comes across high. So the paddle angle, if you think of holding your kayak paddle, like it's a steeper angle. Upper blade is way up in the sky and the lower blade is more vertical in the water, versus low angle, which is, a much less steep angle. And they both have benefit. Wing blade is not as appropriate for doing a lot of different angles. You can play a little bit with low versus high angle in wing, but in flat blades, they actually make blades that are more appropriate for high angle versus low angle. So my recommendation and Dan's recommendation, I'd talk to him. Low angle is just far, far more efficient for endurance. So if you're training something more, high angle is great. It's higher power. It's going to move you a little faster, but it's really hard to maintain for 3 or 4 or 5 hours because the shoulder is doing more work. Like just even if you're getting good core rotation and stuff like that. So to that question, I think it's great to vary it. What we often do in racing that can help is do bump sets. And so to kind of keep ourselves motivated, we'll do mostly low angle paddling, especially if we've got this flat blade and a long distance. And then occasionally to spice things up every half an hour, every 20 minutes, we'll do a 1-minute bump set where we're going back to high angle, a little bit more power, get the boat back up to speed, and then go back down. So variety, just like you and I have talked about on the mountain bike.
Yeah, we do something similar. So we'll do sets of 10 usually. So we'll do 10 strokes or 20 strokes really powerfully every 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And we'll count them out real loud. And then everyone, counts together. And sometimes we'll do it in Spanish or French or whatever. And then we all learn numbers in different languages. And it's just something that keeps us yelling at each other and just kind of like waking up both mentally as well.
And the reality is, like we talked about in that paddling thing, is, if you apply all those things that Dan was talking about with cadence, and then occasionally do a higher angle, which changes, just like on the mountain bike, dropping the dropper post a little bit and changing your body position can help. But as a default, a low angle paddle stroke is going to last a lot longer and have less kind of arm fatigue than the other one. So that was that question. So it's just really cool to get engagement from our listeners. The second kind of big engagement this week was you interacted with a woman who was asking for coaching advice online, right, Nick?
Yeah, Carol.
Yeah, Carol. She was asking for ideas on metrics to give to her coach that's going to help her in this next year. And then there were a number of people online that kind of gave feedback. Then at some point there was a series of posts that were basically like, you don't need metrics for adventure race training, or you don't really need coaching. Just go outside and go outside every day and you're fine, right? And there were some that were fairly strongly worded. There was one that said anybody that uses the word FTP or VO2 max in an adventure race training setting is crazy, or something like that, right? I don't remember exactly what it was. There's a lot of that I agree with, that not all of this is necessary. Like there's all this stuff on the internet with FTP and metrics and VO2 max and heart rate, and none of it is necessary to adventure race. That's the great thing I like about adventure racing, is you can literally just go outside and have a really enjoyable time in this sport. But the big but is it also doesn't mean that metrics are not valuable and not super amazing and beneficial to a huge majority of athletes that are actually trying to improve their performance. So what are your thoughts? Like, what did you talk to Carol's coach about? It sounds like you guys had a conversation, right?
Yeah, him and I had a conversation. We chatted for about an hour. So he comes from a similar background, worked with some collegiate athletes. He's worked with, a lot of pro golfers and endurance athletes, triathletes is kind of the two sides. And he's got a strong background with traditional strength and conditioning coaching and kind of formal education. And so us chatting through, we were really talking about if you're a type 1 versus type 2 muscle fiber athlete, training those different ways. And then we just kind of started going from there on just different rabbit holes and just chatting through everything. And at the end of the day, when you take someone who's an experienced coach who has a background with endurance and understanding endurance, they're able to adapt based on the athlete and what their goals are and able to customize it very effectively. And so it's very clear that he is very well educated and has a good background. And so he just needed to really be clued into like, what is adventure racing and what exactly are we looking at and looking at doing? And so through a simple conversation, went there. Then we actually talked about golfing for a while, about training golfers, because, I coached 2 different NCAA golf teams before when I was at the university, a male and female team. And we were talking about different strategies for that because I was picking his brain out of curiosity. So we really nerded out for quite a while on just a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of topics. We did talk about FTP on the bike, different metrics for testing that, and kind of, that versus actual fatigue resistance a little bit. And then, we talked about traditional strength training, what we're looking at, kind of what kind of background she has, and, kind of just giving him left and right limits on different ways to think about it and approach it philosophically. So,
yeah. And I think the main thing that came off of kind of engaging with that is I want people to understand that the goal of this podcast is not to tell people that they need to train in a certain way. Right? That's like not what Nick and I are doing here. We're not trying to say everybody needs a coach or this is how you have to train or you're wasting your time. But this resource has not existed for the dearth of adventure racing. We've been pulling stuff from various things if you did want to train. And like Carol's question, like there are a lot of coaches out there that don't really know adventure racing. And we know from having coached athletes in other sports and being adventure racers ourselves that there's a lot of this knowledge that can be super helpful for adventure racers. And the reality is, for a lot of people, coaching does work. And not only does it work, coaching is a necessary step in a path towards making improvements that you really want to see. Because partly it's just having that external somebody watching your improvements. Because all of us, like, as I get older, I don't necessarily think I'm improving. I'm sure you're the same way too, right? It takes somebody looking at the metrics if we're really dedicated and seeing what's working and what's not, right? And everybody doesn't need to do it, but we want people to feel empowered to make good choices and have more structured adventure race training plans if they want it.
Yeah, and it's education, right? So I think it was the Swiss Olympic marathon trials, the people trying out for the marathon team every year. It was last year in Tampa, I can't remember. But big field, hundreds and hundreds of like top level runners. You have to qualify to get to the starting line. They go out and then they choose top couple. And I think it was 50% were coached and 50% were not coached, somewhere around there. Now, if you're not coached, it doesn't mean that you don't have a formal, organized training plan. They're just self-coaching themselves, is the way I look at it. And so, just like Jason said, I would say the benefits of a coach are a couple things. One is you're going to get a very effective use of your time. You're going to have a third person looking at you and your metrics, and specifically if you're dealing with little injuries and stuff on when to push or not push, whereas internally you can be conflicted on that. And so, just like you go for a second opinion with a medical thing, you're going with a second opinion on your training, your progress, all of that. And then you're outsourcing all of that and you get accountability as well. I use a coach, right? I can self-coach, but for me, having that accountability and also having somebody as a third person, because I know so much that I can kind of justify doing almost anything if I wanted. And that's not good for me. And especially with injuries, being able to be like, hey, I'm getting this or this. And they're like, hey, look at this, go get this looked at. Hey, based on that, we should switch here. And it's like when I see what they're doing, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly right. Like, that's what I need. And it just gives me that validation as opposed to playing in my mind with, oh, should I push? Should I not push? What should I do? It's like, that's outsourced. I don't have that stress. And you can self-coach. And the thing is, you're going to have to learn a lot, right? So there's a big learning curve to get really well at it. There's some basic guidelines that can kind of get you dialed in, but if you in the ballpark, but if you really want to get dialed in, there's a lot more that goes into it and a lot of self-knowledge. And, the other piece to keep in mind is I used to use this for a variety. I've coached athletes from all different backgrounds, and we'll use team sports, right? So your typical NCAA team sports. There were several teams that were having very similar programs, and there might be differences in some of their injury prevention techniques and some of their accessory work, but the bulk of it was, a lot of barbell type stuff. And some of the coaches would be like, well, why are these teams having such similar programs? It's like, well, the difference between, field hockey and women's soccer in the fall is they're both in season. They're both running for 40 plus minutes at a half at a time, and they have very similar things. So At the end of the day, we're taking Homo sapiens and we're making them bigger, faster, stronger. Well, same thing for endurance, right? We're all Homo sapiens. And so we're looking to take how the body as a human adapts. And we are experts in understanding what that's like and then catering based on your lifestyle, your injuries, your background, your age, your goals, and finding ways to maximize how are we going to get your body in the ways it already responds to stress to stagger and periodize and program those to receive maximal, performance and efficiency given the time constraints that you have.
Super well said. My favorite piece was that it is hard to self-coach yourself because you can justify whatever you feel like on that day. And when you have a big enough knowledge, I do self-coach myself primarily. And it is a tricky thing to do because I can be feeling like, oh, I really want to push hard today. And I know that if I was coaching another athlete, I'd be like, dude, no, it's like this is a recovery day or an easy day or vice versa. So today we're going to talk about FTP, and speaking about all that stuff you just said is amazing because FTP, I'd say it's the buzzword, or was the buzzword. It was like the early buzzword for years and years. And it is a very valuable metric, but just like you were saying, it's not the most important thing to focus on. So there's tons of other, training distribution, time outside volume, sleep, there's all kinds of things. But FTP is a really cool metric for cyclists. And it does have some very, very valuable things for adventure race crossover, right? So tell me it stands for functional threshold power, but what's the easy layman's way for somebody to understand what is FTP?
Yeah, so look at FTP as the amount of power you can put into the bike. So translate this to running. It's like saying, how fast can you run? FTP is how powerfully can you bike, right? And so when we use the blanket term FTP, we're referring to what's the maximal threshold you can handle for 60 minutes all out is the gold standard. At default, that's what we default to, right? So it would be like saying, what's your running pace? Well, that's going to matter over a bunch of conditions. How far are we going? Where are we doing this? Where are we going there? But imagine saying, what's your marathon pace, or marathon time? That's a more universal number that we can kind of wrap our minds around. So typically when we say what's your FTP, we're looking at what's the FTP for 60 minutes.
Yeah. Well, that's technically that is how FTP is defined. The functional threshold power is the average power, the maximum average power that you can maintain on a bike for 60 minutes. So the great thing about FTP is it is the way it is defined for cyclists. It is imminently measurable. Like you get on your bike, you have a power meter or you're on a smart trainer, you ride for an hour, take as hard as you can essentially. And we'll talk about why it's not super good to go out sprinting because then you're going to fall off. But you take that average hour, and often it's very easy for our smart devices to, even if we don't do an FTP test, like in a lab or on our cycle trainer, it's pretty easy for our watches to kind of come up with a very close correlation number. Because if we're doing a lot of hard rides or interval training, or we wear it during a race, it's looking at that when we're going hard and saying, man, this is your FTP, or this is roughly your FTP, right? And so once we have that number, how is it presented to most people? It's presented as a watts measure, right?
Correct. Yeah. So watts is a unit for work, right? So what we're looking at it's newtons over time. So imagine that you are going to push into the pedal. You're pushing with force into the pedal. Well, now if we look at what force are we doing over time, it's kind of a little oversimplistic because there's all different things with the equation, but we're looking at how much force are we putting over a period of time. And so, yeah, it's in wattage is where it comes out. And so if you're on your bike, a computer or whatever, or bike trainer, and you're looking at the watts, and you'll see as it goes up and down, up and down, up and down. The equations typically it'll calculate it every second. It'll give you the wattage, and then it'll average that for the 60 minutes. And then when you see the bike computer, it'll usually do rolling the last 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever those metrics are, it can give a rolling average. But the FTP is going to be the average over that hour. And then there's equations too. I mean, for testing, we can get into that in a little bit, but there's other ways to calculate those. But you're taking like the average of the actual force you're pushing into the pedal every second over the course of whatever time.
And I would say for adventure races and for cyclists, you got to get the FTP test, and everybody gets that number. But the more important metric here, especially as you're tracking your own improvement, is the amount of watts you are generating per kilogram for your FTP. So, for example, my wife Chelsea weighs about 50 kilograms, right? And technically my FTP is higher than hers. Like, I can produce more watts than her. But if you take the amount of watts that she can produce and divide it by her body weight, she's producing on average for her FTP about 4 watts per kilogram, right? I am producing more watts, but I'm heavier. So when I do that division, my watts per kilogram is more like 3.8. So what that starts to tell you is how you can compare riders even on your team if you're looking at training programs, or maybe who's going to do the towing or who's going to kind of have that heavier pack at the start of a race when you are on a bike leg. Is watts per kilogram is generally what's going to give you your kind of in performance on flats and hills. Downhills is a different thing. We're not really looking at FTP for that, but especially for hills, like the amount of watts per kg you can produce is going to get you up the hill faster in general.
Yeah, and it's significantly more important, I think, for hills than flats as well. And so the way to think about that, so you're taking your body weight and you're saying, how much force can I put into the bike based on every pound of weight I have on my body? And so you have to move your body and you're moving it against gravity. And when you're going uphill, gravity is more important, or it's more influential based on the angle of the direction you're going. So you need to push more energy to go uphill, right? And so the heavier you are, the more it's going to push you downhill, and you got to counter that going up. So really that, body weight to weight ratio, kilograms per watts, watts per kilogram is like pretty much the gold standard. And the best way is to try to work on increasing your wattage and your power that you're putting out, as opposed to what you'll see some people do is, and at elite levels it might matter a little different, but if you try to work on that denominators, you try to work on, I'm going to try to lose a bunch of weight so my wattage goes up. I mean, if you're out of shape and overweight, then that's just generally healthy. But for the average racer, fueling properly and going into strong workouts with good energy, just like we were talking about eating cookies earlier and stuff. I mean, we train a ton. So for us, getting extra carbs in, we're burning it off and we're going through, we're not going to pack it on, but we're fueling our energy, which means we probably should be fueling our energy a little bit more. But it's way more important that you're actually working on being stronger and more powerful than you are on just trying to take the easy way of, I'm going to cut 2, 3, 4, 5 pounds, and then my FTP in watts per kilogram will shoot up that ratio. That's a very potentially dangerous, unhealthy, and detrimental way that's going to hurt you in the long run.
Well, and the reality is, this is a training metric. So when you get to the start line, it doesn't matter what your watts per kg is at that moment, right? So when I find this valuable, when I really get people onto it that I'm coaching, to me, it makes it easier for a coach, whether you're self-coach or have a coach, to prescribe you cycling workouts that are really effective in whatever the duration of time you can commit to training is. So the great thing with FTP, and it's not perfect. So to be clear, FTP is a proxy for essentially your lactate threshold, right? So if we go a little deeper into this, FTP is this measure of maximum wattage. But if we were to have the benefit of having blood lactate testing while we were doing these things, as you get better at this, you can maintain, that wattage that's closer to your lactate threshold. Because what happens in your body as you're getting close to threshold, and what we mean by threshold, functional threshold power, is that place at which your body's lactate production starts to basically ramp up to the limit. It's just starting to build out of control where your body can't flush it, right? And once we get to that point, we've all felt this. I'm Nick, it's like when you get to that point, you're pushing hard in a race or on a big hill, and that's it. You hit that ceiling where you'd have to go anaerobic to go any faster, right?
Correct. Yeah. And so lactate's not bad. Lactate's good. It's the hydrogen that builds up and potentially, the calcium reuptake. And so the thing though is that when we lactate something we can easily measure with thumb pricks and everything, and then we correlate it with, ventilatory threshold. So all these are just different ways of saying that the threshold numbers, you have your aerobic and anaerobic, and we're talking about that anaerobic threshold. It's the point to where you go from sustainably anaerobic, meaning you are burning a lot of carbs, you're moving, you're breathing somewhat heavy, a little heavier, and you are doing it at a rate that your body can take all this lactate and hydrogen and all these waste products that are happening from burning carbohydrates in the muscles. And it's able to actually move it, shuttle it out of the area, consume it in other ways, and get rid of it, right? And let's say that the body has the ability, it's really 4 millimoles, right? Is that threshold. And so your body typically can consume up to 3.9, we'll say, right? And it'll vary person to person. Let's say you get all the way up to 3.9, 3.98, and all of a sudden your body is able to still get rid of all that accumulation that's building up of metabolic waste. And then all of a sudden it goes up to 4.1, 4.2, 4.5, 5, et cetera. Well, let's say it jumps to 5. Now, instead of getting rid of it, you're having 1 millimole add up every so often. So let's say every 5 minutes, there's another millimole, another millimole, another millimole. And now all of a sudden it went from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 to 10, and it exponentially increases because there's more and more not being produced out because the process to get rid of it is maxed out. And so, it's like you have a cup with a tiny hole at the bottom and you're pouring water in. There's a rate that it can sustain. And then at some point it starts to fill up more and more and more and more until it overflows. When it overflows is when you hit muscle exhaustion from, legs burning and you can't run anymore and your muscle contractions stop working. And it's that terrible, like if you've ever done a track workout where you're just doing 200 repeats over and over and over again, you get to the point where it's burning, you can't move anymore, you're walking all jello leg and you're hitting the ground. Like that's that feeling.
It's like I said, it doesn't matter when you're racing, but training wise, what we want to do to build our endurance is we want to be able to sustain a time close to that threshold. And so if we know what that threshold is, and the easiest metric, again, nobody wants to poke themselves all the time and do all that lactate measuring, but the watches now and the algorithms are good enough to give us a good indication of, and then with that number, especially if you have a limited amount of time for training, even if you're training 10, 15 hours on the bike a week, it's really smart to know that that's your FTP, and then you can plan workouts that are either well underneath that if you're doing zone 2, or spending enough time right at, or we'll talk through some training protocols at FTP, because what happens is the more time you're able to spend there in a certain amount of workouts, the more efficient your body gets at what you said, moving that lactate, right? And then that threshold starts to move up. It's not that you're actually being able to, like the millimoles, you're not being able to shuttle more of that, but you're able to have a higher power output while your body is able to shuttle that, right? Which is what we want, the adventure racers, especially. To me, the FTP measure is really indicative of how hard my team can push on a bike leg early in the race, right? A lot of this stuff falls apart on day 3, 4, 5. We had sleep deprivation. None of that matters. But the reality is a lot of the people listening to the podcast are doing 6-hour races, 12-hour races, 24-hour races. And that number is a good thing to train with so that it makes us faster and stronger and better able to understand what not to push past. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think something to consider too is, your FTP is going to vary day to day based on how you're feeling, right? So if you were to test, just like we're saying speed, right? If you were to test your FTP when you're feeling super fresh, which is when you should, right? You're going to get a very accurate number. But then if you're in the middle of a training week and you decide at the end of the week to go do this, you're going to see a number that's way low, right? So if you're going to test it, you want to test it high. And then you also need to know that every time you're doing any type of data, you want to overlay it with other data or with subjective feeling as well. So like if you're supposed to go in for, let's say you're going in for an easy zone 2 ride, right? And that zone 2 ride at, let's say you're going to do, I don't know, 150 watts. That 150 watts feels excruciatingly and your legs are super tired and all. Well, to get that wattage out, you're clearly not in a zone 2 easy. You're going way hard. And so you need to kind of keep that base level of understanding on, okay, where's my body at in readiness and what is this doing physiologically as well? And so you need to kind of have that layer of, hey, my body's not ready. And that probably is a signal you need a rest day, right? Or a super easy recovery ride as opposed to a training. And that's where, your coach can help you through all that. But anytime you're doing this, you need to look with layering it in to put it into perspective, I'd say. And then, one thing to look at is heart rate as well. So, when you're biking and you're doing your training stuff, let's say you're programming. I often don't program wattage as well. I'll have my athletes do FTP tests occasionally, and then I'll have them monitor where they're at, and I'll usually see where their wattage is, right, on different sessions. And so I have them going off of subjective measures that I kind of dial in based on where I want them to feel and be based on the physiological zones. And then when they're there, they're looking at heart rate and then also their wattage. And so, 6 months later, we should see that when they're feeling a certain way, their heart rate might be similar, right? Because the heart rate, even though it'll shift in heart rate zones over time, it's slower, but they'll be pushing more wattage at a specific heart rate. So let's say they're doing like a 145 to 150 heart zone range. They're somewhere in there, and I'm seeing that in like their zone 2. Then all of a sudden, we're looking over 6 months and they went from pushing 150 during that and staying stabilized there to now they're pushing 165 staying there. That's a huge shift in power. And so, you can program off of FTP, which it sounds like that's what Jason does. There's other ways too to use it as a background metric as well to see where you're at. And really, when you look at it more and more often, when you're on the trainer or you're outside biking and you have one of these power meters that's going, you start to really dial into how am I feeling at certain intensities? Where are those intensities at? Where's my heart rate? And you can really then see adaptation over long term as well. And even not long term by seeing those like, oh, whoa, I'm having a really good day. Like I am feeling good. I'm in where I usually feel for my zone 2. And my heart rate is only, lower. And I'm pushing a lot more watts. Like, wow, my body's like really ready to go today, And other times you might be tired and it's going to be kind of on the other end where you're feeling super sluggish and it's hard to push that wattage. And now you're like, okay, I probably need to back down a little bit. But now you're so much more in tune with your body because you're getting these data, right? You're getting the wattage, you're getting the heart rate, you're looking at how you're feeling and you're putting it all together and you're getting such a more bigger picture of where you're at physiologically in what you're doing. I mean, Jason, what do you think? Because it's a little different.
No, I think that's great. And I'm going to give just some kind of recommendations from my point of view. I think FTP is a great thing that most endurance cyclists, which are adventure racers are cyclists. It's a good idea to, at the very least, kind of measure once in a while, kind of keep track of as a benchmark to how your overall training is going. You shouldn't think too much about it unless I don't care about an FTP number unless my athletes are willing to train indoors. Because the reality is FTP is a great, like you said, background data if you're doing a lot of outdoor stuff. But where it really shines, where I would really recommend people loving FTP and loving FTP as a training metric is if you are committed to either during the off season or on season or whatever, spending some time on a smart trainer. Because then the structure of workouts, if you're a time crunched athlete, so if you only have a limited time to train, and we'll go more into this in future podcasts, it's not the best thing. I'd rather have an athlete can do 10 or 15 hours a week, right? To build durability, volume, all that kind of stuff. But there's plenty of athletes that can be super successful and only train 5 to 8 hours a week. If I have an athlete that's doing that, then I'm going to be asking you to do a certain number of harder workouts inside on a trainer. And the great thing about a trainer is I can dictate based on your FTP, give you a really structured plan where outside it's harder to follow. I can't say I can't send an athlete outside and say, yeah, go do a 2-hour ride and do 4 by 10 minute blocks at FTP. Because if you're on a downhill, not doing it, right? If you're on a flat into headwind, sure. If you're at a tailwind, like it's really hard to maintain that. But on a bike trainer, I can force really valuable physiological adaptation by putting you at your FTP for 10 minutes, 4 times with a 5-minute break in between, and basically force your body to adapt, build lactate shuttling. We can do sweet spot or over-unders. There's all these buzzwords, but it's super, super effective. I am a huge proponent being a dad, trying to do a lot in my life with the 4-Hour Fuel, with the coaching, with the racing, all this stuff, to especially a large amount of the time using FTP training indoors. And for those people that don't want to do it, no problem. But if you're training on an indoor cycling app, what do you use? I use Zwift or MyWhoosh. What do you use?
I use the Garmin stuff, and then I've just been binge watching movies and stuff, to be honest. And then when I go for my intervals, I have to pause it and put on hate music for a bit because I can't concentrate.
You're still building a program that, most of these smart trainers have an erg, which means you can say, I want to hold 240 watts for a 10-minute interval, and then I'm going to drop down and recover, and then again and again. And the great thing is for that is, you don't have to be thinking for your body to build physiological adaptations. And a lot of times, the more you're out of your head and your body is responding to that stimulus and you are holding a pace. And cycling is even more important at times than running, because running, there's a lot of form, efficiency that, leads to speed. Cycling, most of the data says, doesn't really matter how you pedal, you circle, squares, all that stuff kind of works itself out. And it is a lot about, power output and heart adaptability and how much you're moving that lactate. And it's just a great way to start to build this endurance cycling body if you are doing some training with FTP.
Yeah. So real quick with that, what I love is we're looking at the programs, right? So you did the 4x10s, I think, with 4 minutes rest. Yeah. And it's very similar, right? So let's say I program the same exact thing. The metric is how are we quantifying and prescribing the intensity that we're doing. And so there's multiple ways to do it. At the end of the day, what we're doing to the body physiologically, just like Jason said, the stress we're putting in is what the body's responding to. And the body doesn't, the muscles aren't understanding watts or any of that. It's a way to understand the adaptation. And so really using the FTP can be super powerful. Indoor biker, huge ways and proponents to do it. And there's other ways too. And so, at the end of the day, a lot of the workouts probably look the same. You can do the same workouts, and it's a way to measure that intensity to dial in even more to the training, right? So I think a lot of people, especially recreational adventure racers, go in with, let me just do something every day. I'm going to go mountain bike around the park, and, that's my training. And, if it's hilly, you're kind of getting some intervals in just by going up the hills but it's very not structured, right? Doing intensity distribution, doing these interval sessions, doing things where you're looking at the wattage or the heart rate or the intensity and dialing those in, those are ways to dial you in to get to the specific adaptations that we're looking for. And then when we structure multiple sessions over and over and over again across a week and multiple weeks, and you string them together, that's kind of that art that comes together of how do we build it to maximize all these adaptations.
Yeah. So, because somebody asked me when we covered this podcast to give an example, and again, this is just an example, but we were talking a lot about these ideas, and without getting too much into VO2 max, and if we're just looking at FTP, right, which I think is super valuable for a lot of adventure racers, especially up to that 24-hour level, a great way to think about it is if you're doing in a week time that you're not really going to increase your FTP unless you're spending probably minimum 2 workouts a week being close to or at your FTP. And again, too many is too much because you want those recovery rides, those zone 2 rides. We've talked about that a little bit, but that's super important. But 2 of my favorite basic threshold workouts, and if I'm doing somebody that says, hey, I'm going to get on the bike trainer or cycle 4 times a week, right? Just so that people can take home something. 2 of my favorite workouts. If I have 4 times a week, I'm going to say 2 of those should be zone 2 rides. Zone 1, 2 rides. They should be longer duration. You should be chilling, keep your heart rate once you know your heart rate zones, for me, that's like 145, maybe 150 max, but really in that 140s, long duration, be able to talk, drink, that's where the duration is more important. And then 2 workouts a week, I'm going to mostly be on my trainer for the threshold ones. And one is going to be in what we call the FTP intervals. And that's what I was just talking to you about. And it doesn't have to be 4x10s. A lot of athletes are going to start lower. Like the longer that duration is at FTP, it's uncomfortable. So you might start with, 3 6-minute intervals. But the goal is that each week you're increasing that marginally by 5%. So, and you can do that. So I just recently had an athlete that started with 3 6-minute intervals, right? And then the next week they did 3 7-minute intervals, right? And then they went to 4 6-minute intervals. So you can kind of either increase the time a little bit or increase the number of intervals until you're getting closer to a workout where you're doing roughly 45 minutes to an hour at your FTP within the intervals. And you don't want to do that FTP test every time because that's not how you're going to build. You want to be a place that's a little bit easier than a max race pace, and that you're watching your heart rate, that you're at that threshold. So that's one of the workouts. And then my other favorite one, which I'm sure you do sometimes, is the over-unders. I love over-unders because mentally that's easier for me. And what that means is you're doing a longer duration and you're doing, say, 3-minute intervals that are above your FTP and then 3-minute intervals below your FTP, but you don't get big rests. So for me, I'm looking at, 110% of what my FTP is for 3 minutes and then 90%. So I get a little bit of that variation, but overall the duration is a bunch of chunk of time where my average power is close to my FTP. And again, I'm never doing these more than an hour, but it's approaching that hour thing. So the recovery is not impossible. It didn't feel like I just did a race, but those 2 workouts combined with some long, easy things will start to move that needle up little by little.
Yeah, I love it. And, doing those over-unders, right? The under part is really kind of like floating. So what your body's doing is it's getting better at shuttling all of the lactate and metabolites and hydrogen ions out of those muscles that are oversaturated, and it moves them into others that are not, so they can be consumed or moved around, pushed into the blood and moved into the liver and just around the body, right? And you're really pushing that threshold from the top side of pulling it higher. And then you're going under and you're working on really that shuttling and getting those processes and metabolic reactions going over and over and reinforcing them over and over for that, right? I would say for me, what I like to do with the athletes as well is, there's a neurological piece as well. So it depends on the athlete, where they're at and how long I keep them in different areas. So the more fit an athlete is, the longer the intervals they can really push on, right? The less fit an athlete is, the lower the intervals are to have that same effect, right? And so for me, I'll even start with 30-second hits, which are not for VO2. Those are simply neurological, right? So we're getting the nervous system firing to all those biking muscles and really pushing hard. You see the wattage spike super high. We do that for a couple sessions, and now we've kind of saturated that adaptation, right? Meaning that the body's really refined, pushing a ton of watts, like stupid high watts for an advanced athlete, but it really primes that system really well. And then from there, we can then move in, bump into other kind of VO2 stuff. And then for a lot of athletes, even there's good research showing even, 1x1s and, 2x2s, for example, really good research on that for VO2, right? Now, what you're looking at is the numbers are going to be higher, right? So for 1x1s, you're looking at something like, it depends on the athlete and where they're at. I'll start as low as 8 sets of 1x1, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, and I'll go all the way up to 22 1x1s, right? For a way more advanced athlete. And usually I'd bump up by 2s. So I'd say most athletes are going to be between 14 to 16, 12 to 16, somewhere 1x1s, right? And then sometimes what I'll do is even break it up where I might have them do, let's say, 8 1x1s, 5 minutes floating, where they're going at like low zone 3, and then or zone 2, kind of slow elongated recovery, to just kind of work that area of just kind of recharging a little bit, and then they'll go again. And what we're doing with these is we're looking, when you're doing this work, to generally spike the heart rate more, especially with the more intense lower ones. And so if you look at race pace is going to be in zone 3. And we're going to we have to do a podcast on just training zones, because there's a lot of confusion on those. but we're in this middle ground for zone 3 when we're racing, right? So the further the race, the lower we are in 3, and we drop into 2 and sometimes 1. But for short races, like 12-hour races, even 24, we're going to generally be somewhere in the zone 3. And the shorter the race, the higher in the zone 3 we are. The longer the race, the lower we are. And so we're really trying to optimize kind of that range there. But when we're doing these intervals, the shorter the intervals are, the higher you're spiking that heart rate. So you're going way up into the zone 4 and zone 5, depending where you're at. And the longer the intervals becomes, when you start to get out to the 6 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, that heart rate gets closer and closer down into that threshold area. And now we're working closer and closer into where we're racing at. And so, I like to go kind of hit the smaller ones. We're pushing bigger wattage. We're spiking that heart rate up higher. We're usually seeing super quick adaptations hitting because it's more potent. And then I like to then kind of periodize it to where they're getting longer and longer, building into the 4s, the 6s, the 8s. 4x8s is kind of a good staple with research around it. The 10s, and then, closer to races, I might hit 2x20s, for example.
Yeah. And I think that, the more time we have, the easier it is to kind of build this perfect program. And one of the challenges I think with adventure racing is we have all these different sports to train, right? And what I have found is like understanding what you can, going back to the New Year's resolution, like understanding what you can really do, what you can really commit to, like what you can be consistent at, and then either self-coaching or working with a coach to really make sure they understand that about you so that we can be the most effective. Because all these things, given unlimited time constraints, like being able to build a really structured program that includes VO2 max intervals, high intensity stuff, like being better at sprinting, and then FTP work, longer duration stuff, building durability. That's a whole nother podcast. But I think one thing people can take away is there's so many choices out there, right? And so sometimes it's nice to simplify and say, okay, for 6 weeks, I'm going to do this and see if it works and commit to this. And that can be really powerful. I even do when I'm training athletes for bigger expedition races, is because I do want to build that feeling of success and moving, is sometimes I'll do a 4-week block where the running is superficial. We are running, but it's like our once a week recovery day. And we're actually working on a big cycling block to move that up, right? And then we maintain that where our easy days are just cycling, and then we're moving the running up for 4 weeks, right? So especially, and as we get closer to the race, we're doing it all to kind of peak everything. But it can be really awesome to be in this time in an off season, say, hey, 4 weeks, I'm going to do this, you can find them online, this FTP protocol, and I'm going to see where it pushes me, right? Because I'm going to be on my trainer. I just want to commit to that. I can do long outdoor rides, or I'm going to really work VO2 max. And the ultimate thing is we started like, none of this really matters unless you want it to matter, right? Like on race day, as we get into expeditions, like durability, teamwork, sleep, going in fresh, all those things are the majority of what matters. But smart training, like it just to me, it makes training more fun, right? Like once I know that my coach is programming something for me and that I have a goal with every workout. This is a big thing for me. FTP lets me go into every cycling workout I have saying, what am I doing? Like, do I understand what the goal of this hour is, what the goal of this 2 hours is? And sometimes the goal is don't push hard, right? But that, for me, that needs to have a parameter, right? Because if I'm out with my friends and I'm like, oh, and then I look at my watch and I'm like, damn it, I was like a whole bunch of time in zone 3. So it's nice for me to know, okay, here's my FTP. Like, this is what I can push. This is what I'm normal. Like, I want to be below this. A lot of times I'm just using FTP as a way as like, oh man, I want to be 70% or less for this ride. Right. And then I know that. And I'm like, okay, whoa, I got too excited. Like, why am I doing this? And I love the idea of metrics not being something that gives us anxiety, but something that gives us purpose as an athlete.
I love it. And that's spot on as well. And it's the same thing, when I'm running, I'm using a heart rate with like a chorus arm strap, right?
Uh-huh.
The same exact thing, right? Because you can't really do wattage for running at all. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, no. Heart rate is, and like you said, our outdoors, like even cycling outdoors, my default metric is heart rate, right?
Yeah. So just like you said, right? There's a running group I run with from time to time. Really, two of the guys, their default is they just run faster and faster and faster. And the rest of us, like, I'm just like, hey, I'm holding this pace. Like, this is where I'm at today. And I just cruise with it. And every now and then, if I have intervals or something, once in a while, I'll just kind of break off from the group and do it. But, you know, those guys, it's just their comfort zone is in zone 3, 4. You know what I mean? And so they get to the end of the run and they're super tired and they're exhausted, right? And it's like every single run, though, if a lot of times people are left to a default of not monitoring their intensity or their exertion level, you can be in this like sustainably uncomfortable to like slightly moderately comfortable kind of like feels okay. And those are often in that zone 3 zone that you don't want to spend a ton of time training in,
right?
Unless you're really close to a race. There's ways to do that, or race simulation stuff, or floating with over unders, right? There's times to where you can put it in. But if you're just like zoning out and not running for a while, unless you're a really trained athlete, you're going to end up pushing into these areas that you think feel good or feel like you're getting a workout in. And they're really this kind of dead zone that is not super beneficial for adaptations. Whereas instead, just like Jason said, I use my heart rate as my ceiling, right? So I know, okay, I'm doing my easy runs, easy mod runs, and I know exactly where those are dialed in. I know that, I don't want to really go, it's usually between 147 to 151, and I can base it off of feel as well, but somewhere in there's the upper end. And so I back it down a bit. And so, I'm shooting, I'm running at, usually it'll settle in different areas of a 135 to 145 heart rate. It's kind of that range where somewhere in there my heart just settles in and I'm just in a groove, I'm cruising, and like I'm in that thing, and I can run that all day long, right? I would need to eat food in there, but I can run all day long there. And that's kind of where I want to be. But if you haven't been looking at training for a bit to dial in what that feels like and know where your heart rate is and what that feels and correlate those over and over and over and have a base to where you can actually train in that zone, because a new runner is going to run, and no matter what they do for running, it's going to go up. And at that point, it's just get running and let's just build the running, and then you'll adapt, and then we'll get to the point to where we'll dial it in. But yeah, like that ceiling is spot on. I mean, I use that ceiling all the time in training, and it's super important because if you zone out, it creeps up. And I do that sometimes. I was watching, I was on a treadmill because we had an ice storm over the weekend. So I did 14 miles on a treadmill, and it's like kind of mind numbing, but I was playing like video stuff, right? I was watching like people running up and down and Teton, right? I was watching like 2 or 3 on those, just kind of like, a thing I want to do some point. So I'm just watching these videos over and over. And sometimes I'm getting really into the video as I'm going. And then I look down and my heart rate's a little too high. I'm like, oh man, I got to back it down. And it's like subconsciously you can easily push and drift into things that are not beneficial for where you want to be at.
Now, it's annoying, Nick, but your Garmin has a heart rate alarm.
Oh, I did not.
So your Garmin has a heart rate alarm that will beep at you. This is very valuable for people that you're training, especially by heart rate. You can set a very easy heart rate alert. You can set it if it's too low or too high. The low one gets annoying if you're outside because sometimes like you just are in a downhill or whatever, but like you can set these zones so that it will beep at you when you go above 150. That's what I do a lot for my base runs, right? Because I'm the same way. Like I'm not a great runner. And so a very small increase in effort starts to elevate that heart rate. And I need to know, especially if I'm running hilly stuff, like some of the hills I'm just walking, right? If I'm really trying to do this efficient zone 2 run. And so that Garmin beeps at me, right? And I'm like, ooh, and it's nice. I set it a few beats per minute below my cap. So for me, that's like a 152. So I'll set it at 150. And so as soon as I hit 150, it's like beep, and I'm like, ooh, ease off a little bit, right? A lot of times I just keep running, but just ease off a little bit, focus on my breathing, and it goes right back to where I want it to be. But it's a really cool thing. And that's why I like the indoor trainer for cycling as well, because once I know my FTP and the wattage, I can set these workouts where I could be climbing a virtual hill, but it doesn't let because like you're cycling and you start climbing a hill, it's easy to just want to maintain a pace. Even if I shift down, my heart rate's going to go up. But the great thing about the erg is it doesn't, I can program the whole thing and it says, nope, you're going to hold 170 watts, right? and I don't get to exceed that. Like, if I start to push harder, it just makes the bike easier. It's pretty cool. The way the erg works is nice. So just whatever you're doing with heart rate or ergs on the bike, it is nice to understand, it's not always about like how strong or fast or, can I go? It's just as important to be using these metrics to keep your easy workouts easy, right?
Yeah. And that then turns around to where when you do your hard, sexy workouts, you can really push because
Yeah.
your body's recovered more.
And
Because
you
the
keep
higher, it's exponentially more recovery, right? So let's say you're zone 1 and 2, you're generally recovered within 24 hours, 12 to 24 hours, you're recovered.
Yeah.
But you go to zone, 4 or 5, all of a sudden now you're looking at like 72 hours before your nervous system and your hormonal endocrine system and your muscles are repaired because you're doing more muscular damage. Like it's a lot more for that. And that's even off of, okay, we're doing 20 minutes of high intensity interval. Okay, well, that's 48 hours of recovery, even though 2 hours at zone 1 was, you were recovered within 24.
Yeah. I think that's one of the big takeaways is like that, the FTP number or the heart rate really lets you keep your easy workouts easy and your hard workouts hard. And it gives you some understanding. And there's nothing wrong with it. But again, back to that post that kind of started this whole conversation online. It's like when people say to me, just go outside and do stuff every day. I'm like, that's going to get you so that you feel comfortable doing an adventure race, right? There are a lot of people, though, that's not, if you want to be competitive, just going out and doing something every day. I'm all for the consistency. I'm all for building that base, but it's not going to allow you to be at this place for most of us where we understand where our top end is, where our low end is, how to build that so that we can recover at a higher heart rate. All these things that become important, especially up to that like 24-hour metric. And there's a whole nother conversation on durability and how to train that. That's for another day because we've already been geeking out for an hour and 15, which is great.
Yeah, one last thing to just kind of mention, because we're going to deep dive into metrics on all different things over the course, is the metrics can be internal or external, right? So the internal metric is like physiologically what your body doing internally. So that's things like heart rate, blood lactate. It's how much effort your body pushing, right? External is things like wattage on the bike, right? Or the speed you're running. And so the way you can look at it is, let's take Chelsea and let's take a brand new racer who doesn't have much of a background of training. They may have been training for like a year, but they're very not super fit, right? Because they've been just training for a year. So you can have the same external of 150 watts on the bike. And for Chelsea, that's like super, super easy. And for the other one, it could be super hard. And so now the internal metric is very different, right? And so the key is that just like Jason has for the external metrics they're both useful. It's just kind of knowing that, right? So when we're throwing out numbers, it's using it as a way to understand what's happening physiologically with the body. And so using things like the wattage that Jason has is great because at the end of the day, we want to push more power through that bike to go faster. And so now we're able to do a test and we know based on that threshold that we find out in the FTP, and there's different tests we can do, we're understanding that physiologically the body's doing this at this percentage or FTP. And then we take percentages of that or different equations to figure out where we are in other places, right? And then the same thing with the heart rate and lactate. The lactate is like kind of that gold standard, but we're not going to prick ourselves and draw blood all the time. So heart rate's another way where we're using heart rate to kind of estimate based off the same thing. So for wattage and FTP and heart rate, we're doing the same pretty much tests, and then we're getting that data. And then we're extrapolating it based off of the same kind of equations to get percentages and stuff for other things. And so at the end of the day, we're using these all to understand where our body is, but they're all very customized to the person. And so when you're looking at setting these things, you typically have two ways that people are going to use equations. One is going to be using something like max heart rate minus something, and then, taking things off of that or multiplying by stuff. That's extremely inaccurate, right? It works for a small percentage of the population. Everybody else is way off. If you're going to test whether you're doing heart rate or FTP or whatever, doing something where you're actually testing for some kind of threshold then calculating stuff off of it is going to be way more accurate because it's drawing numbers that are specific to you as an individual to identify where that threshold is based on you as an individual. And so things like age and different stuff, they don't matter as much as what can your body actually do for 60 minutes or for whatever the time period is. And then putting those in is going to be more accurate. So when you're looking at equations, look at those kind that actually take something, whether it's the wattage or the heart rate, or you could do both, and whatever you're going to use to then do the intensity through the different equations or things. If you're nerding out on stuff, or just let us know, and maybe we'll talk about more on setting zones in another one. But using an actual test on your body performing to an actual level is going to be way more accurate. Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really exciting that this podcast has started, because it's kind of giving voice to a lot of these questions that I'm sure a lot of, and adventure racing is growing. Like, that's the thing, is we're seeing so many more athletes come into it and want to be competitive and realize that, and again, it's not all fitness. And like I said at the beginning, like, step one, go sign up for a race. Like you said, sign up, pay for it, and then you're going to do it, right? And then you're going to uncover a lot. But for those of us that, it's expensive and it's time commitment, so you might as well put a little bit of thought into being as efficient as you can when you are actually at the race that you signed up for. And our goal is to kind of help you do that. The big takeaway I want to be, just like what Nick said, is not about your numbers. Well, it is about your numbers, but it's only about your numbers, and using metrics as your individual to gauge whether you are moving in a positive direction, or potentially whether you're over or under training, where you're doing all this work and you're not getting gains. And you're not always going to get gains. You're going to plateau. You're going to backslide a little bit. That's the nature. But in general, is the trend over a year right where you want it to be? Or maybe you're the strongest biker on your team in general, and so you spending all this time increasing your wattage potential is just not where you want to be. You want to spend more time navigating. You want to spend more time how you can serve your team, because this is a team sport. Or again, maybe you are the person that has a really low FTP and your team is like, hey, we'd like to be able to faster, easier, like have these big bike stages be a recovery thing, because we can all push harder and maintain that. So it's just how you can be most effective in your training, and look at those numbers and kind of keep moving forward. And it's fascinating. Some people just don't need to geek out about it. Chelsea's one of those. Like, my wife is, an amazing athlete, and she understands all this stuff, but that's why she has a coach. So somebody can say, hey, I'm looking at your numbers. Here's what you should do, right? Here's how we're going to move it in the positive direction. And some people like Nick and I mean, I don't know. Some days I think I'm going to train, and I just think about training because it's really fun. Right? I'm like, I really should. Speaking of which, after this podcast, you're supposed to go train. I'm supposed to go train. Right?
Yep.
But yeah, so I'm really, really excited. And I just, I want people to leave with the understanding of what FTP is. It's not necessary. It is absolutely not necessary, but it is valuable. For the right kind of person and trying to improve your cycling, it is a valuable number to know and pay attention to, but not obsess over.
Yeah, and it's definitely fun to test once in a while too. If nothing else, it's a metric of how strong am I on the bike. And if you can test that over time, I mean, you should see trends over time, right? If you test it every month, it's going to be up and down, up and down. Test it every 6 months to 12 months, you should see it rise up at the minimum. And, you can easily program and periodize your intensity and where you're at by setting ceilings on, FTP, heart rate. If you really dial in how you feel, that can be another one, but it's really got to be dialed in with other metrics. And at the end of the day, just really going just one little level deeper with the training you're already doing to dial in the intensities at different points for where they need to be goes a huge way into taking it to the next level.
But let's be honest, Nick. The most important reason to know FTP is so you can be like this. Hey, bro, what's your FTP? What's your FTP, man? I just tested mine. So what is it, Nick?
What, mine?
Yeah.
Yeah, I hit 240. Was it extrapolated to? So it was recently I think it's like 3.49 is what it came out to per kilogram.
Man, we're so the same. Mine's literally, if I go in there and log in, it's going to say 240. So, and we're probably close to the same weight.
We're
So
very close. Yeah.
we didn't even get bragging rights. So basically ours is both, 3.5. Sometimes, if I'm light, it's 3.6, 3.7, but it's still far below Chelsea's.
Yeah. What's Chelsea at? I'm curious.
Chelsea, I think right now is at about 4.2
Yeah, that's wild.
watts per kilogram. She just did the esports race last night, and her time for the whole race was 1 hour and 6 minutes, and her average watts was like, I don't know, it was 4.2, I think, for that. And so
And
that
then,
was pretty crazy.
yeah, and then when you look at like Tour de France guys, like it's insane. Like guys are pushing out like, so I can't remember what it was. I was reading
7.
about. Yeah, it's insane. Someone was pushing like over 400 watts for like 2 hours or something
Yeah, yeah. I
crazy.
mean, they're doing 7 watts per kilogram, and at peak thing, they're doing climbs at like 9 watts per kg or 10 watts per kg. It's crazy. But yeah, I mean, you should just know your number so you can brag about it online because, and then, my favorite thing is knowing how irrelevant it is because, with good durability and good teamwork, you can, like, you're not looking at the start line. Wouldn't it be cool if there was an adventure race where we all had a jersey that said our FTP on it? And then it would just be really cool to be like, oh man, that team's got super high FTP, but they'd probably lose because they don't have good navigation or teamwork or whatever.
Yeah, that'd be wild. And you know what would be neat too is looking at so again, FTP, we're estimating an hour, right? Well, when you extrapolate that over time, if you can raise your FTP, it correlates with how long you can go, right? But fatigue resistance is different. So it's like over long periods of time, how well can you maintain and when does drop offs happen? And that's a completely different thing that's kind of much more elusive to train. I
And
feel it's more elusive.
this is what we're going to talk about in a future podcast. Ability is what people are calling it in the cycling world, but yeah, fatigue resistance. And that is far, far more important in the scope of long duration adventure races, especially when we get into 24 to expedition. And like you said, it is the magic elusive rabbit that you try to catch and it just, you don't even know where it is or how to approach it. But I have some thoughts on it, so we'll get there.
Same.
But I
Love
think
it.
it's good. I think we should go train. What do you think?
Let's do it.
Okay.
All right.